The use of artificial sweeteners like Splenda and sucralose have exploded over the last 2 decades. So much so that data from NHANES shows that approximately 30% of adults report having one of these zero-calorie sweeteners every single day. Since the time that these artificial sweeteners have been released to the general population, there has been an increase in multiple chronic diseases through the same time period. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the two are linked, but it definitely means we should spend some time figuring out if there really is a connection between the use of artificial sweeteners and the chronic diseases that are now plaguing us. One topic that I want to specifically discuss today is the potential connection between the use of artificial sweeteners and the autoimmune thyroid disease known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis. This is particularly concerning for thyroid patients because if there is a connection between artificial sweeteners and Hashimoto's, it is a big deal. Many thyroid patients will opt to use zero-calorie sweeteners because of their alleged benefit on weight. After all, who doesn't love the idea of tasting something sweet without accounting for all of the calories that are associated with that sweetness? This is the siren song of artificial sweeteners and other zero-calorie sweeteners. And patients with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's thyroiditis are more susceptible to this allure, given that these conditions often result in weight gain. We know that women are far more likely to end up with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and we also know that women are far more likely to use zero-calorie or artificial sweeteners as well. For this reason, this population should be very careful before using artificial sweeteners. So, is there really a connection between Hashimoto's thyroiditis and the use of these sweeteners? Potentially, and we can look at one case study to elaborate why this is. In this case report, a 52-year-old woman who was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis was able to completely normalize her thyroid lab tests, including her TSH and thyroid antibodies, and completely eliminate her Hashimoto's symptoms just by eliminating sucralose from her diet. By her own report, she consumed approximately 6 grams per deciliter of artificial sweeteners daily for over 14 years. And during these 14 years, the only symptom that she reported experiencing was weight gain. By the time she presented to her doctor, she had a TSH level of around 12 and a TPO antibody level of around 200. This, by the way, if you're not familiar with these lab tests, is a classic presentation of Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And this is really where things start to get interesting. Her doctors saw this and put her on levothyroxine, which is the standard of care, and pretty much what any conventional doctor would do in the same situation. Taking levothyroxine in this context caused her TSH to lower down to a more normal level, which is exactly what you'd expect. But this patient took it upon herself to do more. She recognized that there was a connection between her 20 pounds of weight gain and the consumption of artificial sweeteners. So all on her own, she decided to eliminate these sweeteners from her diet. As a result of making this one change, her thyroid function started to normalize, and in fact her TSH actually went into the hyperthyroid range. This wasn't because she pushed herself into hyperthyroidism. This happened because her thyroid started to heal and produce thyroid hormones, which means she no longer needed her levothyroxine. But more important than this, she saw a normalization in her TPO thyroid antibody levels. This means that this particular patient experienced a remission in her Hashimoto's as defined by a resolution in her symptoms, a normalization in her thyroid function, which is her TSH, and a complete normalization in her TPO antibodies. And this, by the way, is the standard in which I would consider somebody who had Hashimoto's in remission as well. Obviously, when the doctors saw these results, they were very surprised and they decided to write up this case study, which is why we have this data. But before they did, they tried to control for any confounding variable, which would have confounded the results that we see. After controlling for every variable that they can think of and trying to find their reason to explain her spontaneous remission, they came to the conclusion that the only thing that could have caused her remission was the removal of her artificial sweeteners. Now, does this case report mean that there really is a connection between Hashimoto's thyroiditis and the use of artificial sweeteners? No, it definitely doesn't. But what it does tell us is that there is a potential connection. And when you look at all of the available information, which we're about to discuss next, it becomes very clear that avoiding artificial sweeteners, if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, is a very good idea. Here's why. Number one, there are very few treatments available for somebody who has Hashimoto's thyroiditis. The The reality is that patients who have Hashimoto's thyroiditis are severely lacking in the treatment option department. Really, the only treatment available to somebody who has this condition is the use of thyroid medications like levothyroxine. And as you will recall from this case study, this is exactly what the doctors did here. But if you know anything about Hashimoto's, then you know that levothyroxine is really just a way to mask the symptoms of hypothyroidism, because it doesn't do anything for treating the underlying disease, which is autoimmune disease. In the case we just discussed, the primary treatment that helped reverse the autoimmune condition was the removal of artificial sweeteners from the diet. This is an important distinction because taking the levothyroxine didn't cause her remission. I've been preaching for a long time that changing your diet has the potential to help if you have hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's thyroiditis. But the biggest problem with diet is that it's hard to prove that changing your diet has a beneficial effect on these conditions. After all, we have to come to the likely conclusion that even though some patients with Hashimoto's may need to remove artificial sweeteners from their diet, doesn't mean that every single patient with Hashimoto's must do the same. There are definitely healthy people out there who can tolerate artificial sweeteners without any issue. For this reason and many others, it's really hard to prove that there is one best diet or that changing your diet will act as a treatment for Hashimoto's. But based on the fact that there are so few treatment options available to somebody with Hashimoto's, aside from levothyroxine, it's a no-brainer, especially because, number two, you won't cause any harm by removing them from your diet. I'm not trying to suggest here that the sky is falling and that artificial sweeteners are to blame for everything that we've experienced in our society, but why would you as a patient consider consuming them if you don't have to, and if their consumption is associated with even a small increase in the risk of diseases? It just doesn't make any sense. The only reason you might suggest using them in your diet is that they imparted some benefit that you couldn't get elsewhere. But that's not what we see. You'll be just fine if you remove them from your diet, and we haven't really seen any studies which promote or prove that they provide any benefits. In fact, given available data, it's far more likely that consuming these sweeteners will cause more harm than good. Which leads us to number three, the use of artificial sweeteners has been linked to multiple diseases in both animals and humans. It would be one thing if we saw that the use of artificial sweeteners provided benefit to something like weight loss in humans and animals, but that's not what we see. Instead, we see that major organizations like the World Health Organization recommend against their use by citing that not only do they provide zero benefits, but that their long-term use may be associated with chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular risk, and an increase in mortality. But forget about these potential concerns for just a minute. We also see some research that suggests that the use of artificial sweeteners have a suppressive effect on the immune system. These studies have been done in petri dishes, so we can't extrapolate them to humans quite yet, but this connection between their use and a suppressive effect on the immune system might be why we see that when the patient in this case study removed them from her diet, she saw a remission in her Hashimoto's. If you zoom out and look at the big picture, you see that since the FDA approved aspartame for use in the 1990s, we've seen a massive rise in chronic inflammatory conditions, which track perfectly with the increase in use in these compounds. Again, correlation does not equal causation, but right now we sure are seeing a lot of smoke. It would be one thing if these artificial sweeteners were your only option, but that's not true either. Number four, there's no reason to consume artificial sweeteners because there are other more natural, safer options available. There are two major classes of zero-calorie sweeteners that you should be aware of. The artificial group consists of names such as aspartame, asulfame potassium, sucralose, neotame, and saccharin, and the natural plant-based low-calorie sweeteners, which include sugar alcohols like xylitol and erythritol, stevia, monk fruit, and thaumatin. The difference between these two groups is that artificial sweeteners have been synthetically modified to be hundreds of times more sweet than sugar. In addition, they are not considered to be naturally occurring. Natural sweeteners, on the other hand, are considered to be natural because they are typically extracted from things like fruits, roots, and the leaves of various types of plants. The point I'm trying to make here is that you don't have to use artificial sweeteners if you're trying to sweeten up whatever you're eating. Ideally, you'd want to cut out excessive sweeteners from your diet, whether they be natural or artificial, because this allows your taste buds to become desensitized to sweet things. But if you were going to use something, then you might as well use the natural option instead of the artificial option. So far, these natural options don't seem to carry the same baggage as their artificial counterparts. And number five, there are far better ways for patients who have Hashimoto's thyroiditis to lose weight if that's their goal. but I do get the appeal. No matter who you are, there's some sort of sweet food that calls your name in the middle of the night. Whether that's cupcakes or pizza or brownies or whatever pastry you can think of, there's something out there that you crave. And given the alternative, which is serious willpower required to completely exclude these foods from your diet, it's no reason why many people opt for these zero-calorie sugar substitutes. Can you imagine a world where you can eat pizza and donuts or whatever it is and maintain your weight easily? In essence, this is really what sugar substitutes are trying to sell you. But here's the rub again, it doesn't work. Replacing sugary sweets with zero-calorie substitutes doesn't help you lose weight. In fact, the opposite may be true. Several large-scale studies have shown that there is a correlation between the increase in consumption of artificial sweeteners and increase in weight. But you know what does work if you're trying to lose weight? Eating real whole foods, exercising regularly, getting more sleep, reducing your stress, optimizing thyroid medication, and taking the right supplements. Not only will these things help you lose weight and keep it off, they also have the added benefit of helping put your Hashimoto's into remission. These treatments will not only help your thyroid health, but they will also help your overall health. If you are somebody who is having a hard time losing weight and you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I'd recommend checking out this video next. It walks you through the most common mistakes that thyroid patients make when they're trying to lose weight.